Good evening and welcome to the COW budget meeting at the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board on May 28th, 2025. I would like to call our meeting to order, acknowledging that this meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin homelands. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin nations for their stewardship of these lands since time immemorial. Do we have a mover for approval of the agenda? Trustee Lyra. Does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? No, none opposed, so that's carried. In accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, does any board member have an interest to declare? Seeing none, I would now like to move on to the approval of the agenda. We've done that. Moving on to item 5, delegations. There are no delegations this evening. And moving on to number 6, discussion items. I now call upon Director Giroir to introduce report 25-035, Financial Sustainability Plan in Fiscal Year 2025-2026 Budget Landscape.
Through you, Chair. Thanks. So first, I'm going to start with some of the financial pressures that the board's facing. We've talked a lot about replacement costs in the past. $16.8 million pressure on the organization, essentially bargained benefit, non-discretionary. And we are, as a board, below the provincial average in most of the categories of reasons why employees are absent. And this is a straight math shortfall in the technical papers that puts a pressure on the board. The moratorium, this is a new one that I haven't talked a lot about to the trustees, but we are losing $20.8 million in revenue for all the vacant pupil places that we have in the system to support our facilities. And that that's our buildings like snow removal, consumables, custodians. So the moratorium not allowing us to address those vacant pupil places puts that pressure on us to continue to maintain those buildings without the appropriate funding. This is non-discretionary based on the ministry policy. And it's there used to be a top-up program by the ministry, but that has since been taken away. So again, this is another straight math shortfall in funding and a financial pressure for the board. Portable moves is another area where they have a set pot of funding, and we input our data each year, and it's a non-discretionary for the most part. We might be able to shave a portable move or two here, but it's a straight math shortfall. Last year, it was 1.7 million. This year, it's 2.2. But we have to have portables or places for our students to go to school. So really not a lot of wiggle room for us in that area. Statutory benefits, another area that's non-discretionary to the board. It's difficult to calculate the exact amount. A lot of boards are using 2018 as a marker in the sand, and we're estimating that there's at least a $10 million shortfall in this area. Last thing is, not the last thing, but the next thing is inflation. We talked a lot about inflation. Again, non-discretionary for the most part. Cleaning supplies, things like that are up 40 to 60%. Core software that we use, our payroll and the HR systems, up between 80 and 100%. So obviously, this is a huge pressure, and it's currently being underfunded by the ministry. Pay raises and benchmark shortfall. So this is really just talking about the recent pay raises we received. It was a $19 million shortfall in the in-year in 23-24, $5 to $7 million shortfall this year, same as ongoing years. And again, centrally negotiated, non-discretionary, or at least mostly non-discretionary in the sense that the ministry would argue that maybe you have too many staff, but it's the reality of all school boards, and it's not in alignment with the revenues we receive are not in alignment with the actual expenses that we receive. Special education. So this one is something that is more within our control. It's semi-discretionary, but obviously there's lots of Ontario human rights policy and things that we have to do as a board to meet the needs of those students. So really, it's only semi-discretionary in my mind. So when you look at it from an overall perspective, that is $80 million that we're trying to juggle as pressure. So when boards talk about being underfunded or getting new funding, this is $80 million that are being taken away from our classrooms and to support our students, and why boards are struggling, why 66% of the boards across the province are in a deficit situation. There are some financial positives for us as an organization. I think trustees passing of the elementary program review, while not a cost savings measure, will allow us to go from 4 to 2 programs and will help us better align our resources. So that's definitely a financial positive. The size of our deficit is not as large as some boards out there. It's not an unmanageable amount for us to take action on and resolve. We do have kind of 2 problems here. We have a reserves issue, which we need to address. And we do have capital assets, I think, that could help resolve some of that situation. McGregor Easton's school that we had circulated for proceeds of disposition, and hopefully we can sell some of those properties to help us address that portion of our problem. Then there's the ongoing structural deficit problem, and that's really only gets resolved with 1 of 2 things, either reductions in program or increases in revenue. Unfortunately, our financial realities are there's no significant new funding to school boards, and we've been talking about tough decisions that were going to have to be made. And I think, now that we're in our 4th deficit year, and if we made no changes, we would be in a 5th. Those tough decisions are here now for us. The ministry is going to expect a balanced budget. That's the reason why they sent the investigators in to look at what we were doing and what we could do. We've estimated that we would probably need to reduce about 20 million in expenditures to have a balanced budget. And we are in a very vulnerable position with no accumulated reserves anymore. So the next slide is about the financial sustainability plan. So this is something that we've been working on since we realized in 23-24 that we had a financial issue, a sustainability issue. And so we developed a plan and we worked through DEC on some immediate actions, some middle-term actions, some long-term actions. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the immediate actions that we took as staff was starting to send the message that just because you have funding in your budget doesn't mean you can spend it, right? So we did a stop and review of all discretionary spending, especially large purchases, especially things that were more discretionary in nature, like guest speakers, conferences, PD, value for money, core business, not core business. We did not a hiring freeze. I shouldn't have put freeze in there, but we did a hiring review process where every vacancy was reviewed at DEC every week to ensure that we could or we had to do it or we didn't have to do it. We also reviewed multiple areas for potential savings. What could we do for non-classroom replacements? Ultimately, there was nothing that we could do there, but we had to look at different kinds of options. But certainly when we had vacancies in other areas, we could leave them vacant for a period of time. And, things like leave buyout. So all the little short-term things we could do. With all those actions, we believe that we've generated between $4 and $6 million in savings. But remember, at revised estimates, we were $8.7 million in the red at that time. And since then, there's been some additional pressures. So we're still at a $4.2-ish million deficit. Some of our medium-term actions were we did some benchmarking studies and what programs could we suspend or cancel. So this was kind of our 3-month look. This year, we did look at the SLP program, but we decided not to make any changes to that or make any recommendations to that. Some summer programs. Really, we focused more on 25-26, right? So we looked at other programs. Like I said, we remodeled adult high school, OCV, special education, community use, different things like that. The long-term plan was to kind of bring our administration positions and expenditures closer in alignment with funding, to bring programs in general in closer alignment with funding, cancel remodel programs that were not mandated or not cost neutral, better business practices across the board in our decision-making, kind of an enrollment branding campaign. We do a lot of really good stuff here at the OCDSB, but we don't always get recognition for all the programs and things that we do. You know, being one of the only boards in the province that can offer dual track programming, bilingual programming is impressive. And then a kind of a divestment and repurposing of some of our properties like McGregor Region to help solve our reserves issue. So ministry funding, and I did this a little bit backwards, but just looking at the recent announcement, we haven't had a lot of time to digest the dropping of the technical papers, but just looking at the REPs that they sent, there's really a very minor bump of $261,000, and the ones in green are the ones where we received a little bit of salary growth. So majority of that additional funding is really salary growth. And then a bunch of ones in yellow are ones where we actually spend salary. We didn't receive any additional money. So it's really a new pressure on those REPs. And then the ones in white are more stagnant. And the one in yellow was one they removed. So I know the ministry likes to talk about $30 billion in investments in new money, but the reality is it's not a significant change for us here at the OCDSB. The next slide is going to show that as well. If you look at the facilities line, for example, it's got a 2% bump. Considering that the pay raise was 2.5%, the 2% bump, now not all the facilities fund is salaries, but more than 60% of that is salaries. So the 2.5% salaries increase really was little to no increase, and that's across the board in a lot of these. So you got to remember that they talk about, you know, increased percentage to the board, but they don't talk about the increased, they talk about the increased revenues, but they don't talk about the increased expenses. And the majority of these increases are immediately consumed and do not cover all the expense liabilities that have come with those pay raises. So the last slide is we do have a responsibility to present to the group here a balanced budget, and we have targeted reductions in certain areas that the staff have been working on over the last couple of months. So central and admin supports, we see that around, oh, looks like my tabbing didn't work well there, but about $9.3 million in targeted reductions, academic reductions of about 4.8 and some special education reductions of about 4.8. And that is it for me. I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Associate Director Joie. I've started a speakers list, starting with Trustee Kaplan-Murth, Trustee Scott, and then Trustee Lyra. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. You can hear me, yes?
Yes, we can.
So thank you for that report. I guess I have a question. First of all, you say in the report that you want to only focus on necessities, that because of our because we're potentially going into a 5th year in deficit, because we're being investigated, although we've already been investigated for the last 4 years, that we need to focus on necessities. So I guess I would like to know how necessities are defined, because what I'm seeing is that you're thinking that you can save about $9 million and change in central administration, but you're looking to save almost the $4,800,000 in special education. So in what way is special education not a necessity? That's my first.
So first, I'd like to correct your comment that we've been under investigation for 4 years. We haven't been under investigation for 4 years. We just recently became under investigation. We were under enhanced reporting with the ministry for the last 2 years based after our second deficit. Then we became watched by the ministry for to ensure that we were being fiscally responsible. And so we were doing monthly reporting for the past 2 years with the ministry. And the term necessity is, we don't define necessity as what we need to do. We define necessity kind of what we're funded to do, what our core responsibilities are as an organization. Are we being fair to all of our students? For every dollar that we spend on an area like special education, overspend on special education is a dollar that on top of the other $60 million that is being taken away from our regular students. So it's a balancing act. We have a responsibility to all of our students, not just pockets of our students. So this is where it comes to making tough decisions as an organization and what we can support and what we can't support. But at the end of the day, you know, when you have a budget, you have a responsibility to build a program that stays within the budget. And if you don't have any reserves, then you have to make choices.
Okay. I grant you that the OCDSB has been under enhanced supervision, but if you've been making monthly reports to the ministry for the last 2 years, I guess then the question is, they've been overseeing that. So then why are we actually in the same situation?
We're in, because remember in year
Understand that we are
3,
chronically underfunded by the Ministry of Education, but
yeah, in year 3, so the reason why we're in the same situation is because we have that $80 million in pressures that I identified. Like, those pressures haven't gone away and they haven't changed, and in some cases that they've just increased due to time. But remember in year 3, which was 23-24, we actually passed a balanced budget. We were actually on target to land a balanced budget, and in fact, we were on target to land a surplus budget. We were looking to actually surplus a little bit. And then the Bill 124 and the collective agreement pay raises came through, and they didn't come through until the end of the fiscal year, and they impacted 23-24 and 24-25. So that put us in an immediate deficit for 23-24 because we were $19.1 million underfunded for what that liability was. And then in 24-25, it put us in an $8.7 million deficit at revised estimates, of which we could immediately address $4 million of that. And then the other $4.2 million we've been working on since revised estimates to try to address as an organization.
okay. So if I could just finish my sentence then, I mean, what I hear is that, so we are $19 million, you said, over budget because of those changes, but that argument says that we could actually support special education, the services that we're providing, but the structural problems are because we're not able to adequately remunerate our teachers or our educators. So like, we are arguing two things at once here. We're saying that that we need to somehow address this huge deficit, but then also, even when we think we have a balanced budget, something else comes along. I would like to hear how, you know, canceling more programs, especially for special education, is going to address this next unforeseen change that is going to come up, because I'm not hearing evidence that we, you know, through branding campaigns or through cutting special education, we're going to address that kind of a deficit. And you said the EPR was supposed to have saved $15 to $20 million over the next 2 years. So what?
No, I never said that.
What
I
is
never
the
said EPR was going
plan?
to save $15 to $20 million over the next 2 years.
It says that in the report. It says that $15 to $20 million reductions over the next 2 years.
Program
based
reductions,
on
not
the
elementary program reductions. Program reductions of all sorts across the system. Program reductions. We have to do less to reduce our expenses. It's because our expenses exceed our revenues chronically right now because of underfunding by the ministry. And so reducing our expenses is reducing our programs. And the recommendations that we'll put forward for a balanced budget will offer reductions across the system, across our programs, no area being left untouched, especially areas
I
that are
understand that.
chronically over.
Okay. I would like to
Trustee
know
Kaplan-Murphy, you have
what
5
additional
seconds.
savings.
Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, can I put you back
Yeah, so
on
I
the
know that, but he
seconds?
kept speaking over me. Yeah, you can, but he kept speaking over me and my time kept going down. So I would like to at least finish asking my question, which
Ask your
was,
last question.
yeah, thank you. So I would like to know how much more we could save if we were to make further reductions in senior staff, if we were to reduce the number of superintendents, associate directors, and other people who are the most well remunerated in our system. If the answer is we can't do that, then I want to know.
So our staff recommendations will have senior staff reductions. And so we will be within ministry benchmarks on senior staff. And a senior staff member is not going to address the structural problems that we have within our organization. We need to make, you can't solve a $20 million problem with a $200,000 reduction.
Okay, next on our speakers list, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would really appreciate it if we could have a very short recess in order to get copies or emails of the slide presentation. The numbers in the charts, particularly those around the funding that we are anticipating, are too small to read on the screen for most of us, and for those who don't have the ability to see all the numbers and photographic memories at the same time. It's a little challenging remembering which things we want to ask the questions about. So if it would be possible for everybody to be provided with that, that would be very helpful for the discussion going forward.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. We'll take a moment's break. We'll take a 5-minute break. And resume. Trustee Scott's going back on the list, so Trustee Lyra, you're next.
I want to start in the same vein that Trustee Scott was on. I think it is a dereliction of public accountability not to include these numbers in our reports. We as trustees have not had time to read the numbers that are now being discussed. and the public hasn't had a chance to read these numbers. And so I really think if we want to do our due diligence on public accountability, we need to make sure that the information that we're supposed to be discussing is provided in advance, both to us and to the public. So I would hope that these numbers are going to be amended back to the agenda and included in future agendas. And when you have relevant things that you're going to be putting on a slide deck, they need to come to us in advance. All right, that said, I'm looking for a cost-saving estimate for the EPR. Now that we have committed to it, what are we expecting? How much money are we expecting to save in the next couple of years?
Through you, first I'd like to address your comment about the numbers in the slides. The majority of the numbers were in the report that we distributed yesterday. You got to remember the technical papers just dropped on Thursday and Friday, so we're struggling through that information while we're in the middle of investigation. So I'll apologize for not getting the information out any sooner, but we are doing the best we can with the limited resources that we have as a staff. So this is a very fluid situation, and we have very tight timelines, both from the ministry. And so this is why we're in the situation we're in. And it's unfortunate that the election was called and everything was pushed to the right, but that is a big reason why some of the numbers or some of the slides that you see weren't distributed in advance. As far as the EPR savings plans go, we never designed EPR to be a savings initiative. So there's no savings plan developed around EPR. And the way we're implementing EPR with exceptions and whatnot are going to chew up some of the savings that would be had. Not to mention that a lot of the enrollment of students is going to be driven by parental choice. So there's no way to estimate on what choices those parents are going to make as far as whether it's an English class, a French class, will they have consolidated numbers in one school that we were anticipating or not. So there's way too many factors to start assigning savings to EPR. And to be honest with you, the initial phases of EPR may end up costing us more money. For example, next year, we do anticipate some students wanting to go to the school that they will eventually be going to in the following year, and that may end up increasing our transportation costs. So I think it would be premature to start trying to capitalize on savings associated with EPR. Each budget year, as we start to see the decisions that parents make, those efficiencies will hopefully materialize in how we load class sizes and make further changes and recommendations to our staffing levels and to our coaching and all the other different aspects of supporting those programs. But anything that we do now would be like enrollment estimates. We have fantastic financial modeling for enrollment estimates that have worked for us for 20 years, but for the last couple of years, they haven't worked to us based on political influences and other influences that are impossible for us to estimate. And so we would be in the same situation.
I'm going to start by addressing the first piece, and that is, this is not the first time I have said that we need to get this information in advance. This has been a continual concern of mine at budget processes across the last number of years. If you had time to put it in a slide deck in a table, you had time to append it to the agenda. And I know that doesn't leave us as much time as we would like. Trustee Blackburn, are you all right? Okay. So I am of the belief that we need to give as much information as we can to trustees ahead of time so that we have a chance to prepare. And there's stuff in here that was not in the report. Some of it was, some of it was not. So do you have a comment on that?
I guess I would say that it's unfortunate that we have cut admin across this organization over the past couple of years to the point where I have a very small finance team that sometimes struggles to make payroll, and the amount of time it takes to get the technical papers and generate some of these reports doesn't leave us the flexibility to prepare them 2 weeks in advance or a week in advance like we would like. I literally was doing this slide deck today and making changes to this slide deck today and creating some of the tables in the slide deck today. Had a 12-hour day yesterday. So, I apologize but, I hear comments about let's reduce senior staff. We're working long and hard to try to produce the materials and give you guys the information that we can. And, we can only do so much with the capacity that we have.
I see. So your assertion, as I understand it, is that we cannot get the materials in time or meet our obligations under our bylaws around notice on the information for trustees because we don't have the staff in admin. That is the assertion you are making?
Trustee Lyle, the comments duly noted. Staff will try to get it out as quickly as we can for our meetings.
Okay. I have a question about other districts. You spoke about how 2/3 of districts are not currently expected to, are currently in deficit positions and are not expected to remedy that before the end of the year. Do you believe it is the intention of the province to address this province-wide, or are they just expecting public education to cost less or to spend less than it has in years previous across the province?
So that's where the districts were at revised estimates. I don't know where the districts currently stand. Financial positions change. They're very fluid for organizations, including our own. I think I mentioned in one of my slides, I don't see any new revenues coming from the ministry. And what I hear from the ministry right now is that they're going to hold boards accountable for spending the resources that they're currently giving them to support students in the ways that they intended those resources to be used in the way that they give them to us in the funding formula. And in several areas, we're not following the funding formula and how we're utilizing our resources. And I do expect significantly more scrutiny in those areas. In particular, they have also put some parameters around some of the funding that they hadn't put around in the past, like saying you can only transfer a certain amount from this pot to this pot. So I think that it is the intention of the province to ensure that we're doing the things that they expect us to do with the resources that they give us.
Okay. If nothing changed, let's say we had a huge surplus. Just work with me for a moment. If nothing changed, are the structural deficit funding issues, the $80 million that you have said, growing or shrinking against provincial funding? So if we made no changes, would those numbers grow over time or shrink over time?
Those numbers would grow over time.
Okay. You talked a little bit about the moratorium and the cost that has. It is, as I understand it, having heard from planning a great deal over the last number of months, it is impossible to perfectly size the district. We're never going to be able to fill exactly every slot and no more in every school because children don't come in nice collections of 24 and a half. So my question is, how much of that is realistic possible savings if the moratorium was lifted and we got to consolidate classes? How much would we still be bleeding on that line item?
That's a tough one to answer because I think you're right. I think I put it out as the full shortage of funding that we're not receiving. I think realistically, schools should be at between 80 and 90% capacity. That's a healthy balance to ensure that you have a full population of the programs that you're offering within those schools. Realistically, I think we would need to look at a variety of factors if we were to say close schools. Like sometimes if that's the only school in the community, you can address some of those shortfalls with boundary changes. But when you're trying to fill more schools with 17,000 vacant pupil places across the system, that's when you start to struggle. And when you start to have schools literally beside each other that are both at 43%, which doesn't make a lot of business sense. So I wouldn't want to put numbers on that, but I'm certainly sure that if the moratorium is lifted and we could readjust some of our school boundaries and better utilize our facilities, there would be significant savings there.
My concern is that we say we're $20 million down because of the moratorium. The province turns around and lifts the moratorium and expects us to fill a $20 million hole with that. I see I'm out of time, so I'm going to go back on the list. But my concern is that a realistic number to put in here as a saving, or if they lifted the moratorium, are we not going to be able to recoup that full 20?
So I didn't call it a savings. I called it a financial pressure, and it's lost revenue. It's not a savings. So we would never save $20 million by the lifting of the moratorium, but we are losing $20 million in lost revenue because of those vacant pupil places, and lifting the moratorium would allow us to make decisions to help alleviate that. So the province can't turn around and say, okay, now, boom, we lifted the moratorium, you owe us, you've got to find $20 million worth of savings. Wouldn't work that way.
Okay. I'd like to go back on the list, please.
All right, moving on with our first-time speakers list. And once we've gone through the trustee list, then we'll move to our community members. So we've acknowledged that your hand is raised there in any. So moving on, trustee Milburn.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. So the first question I have is on the proposed savings or areas that we're looking at, can you please expand on what kind of reductions we can expect to see in the central and administrative, academic, and special education supports that are being proposed as a reduction?
Through you, Chair, you've seen some of them already. You've seen in academic staffing, you've seen certain positions identified in various areas. I've talked about 2 SOs being part of the reductions. So we went across and we benchmarked a variety of different, against different schools and against the funding formula. And we came up with a list of different types of reductions. On the academic side, some of that was cleaning up ratios. We were staffing at the wrong level for the e-learning courses at secondary. That saved us a couple of positions. And so right now, those are targets. I think you'll see more depth in those areas when we present the staff recommended budget, but we're still working through that.
Okay, and my second question, and then I would like to be added back to second time speakers list. Last night was an example of board motions and how they are tying up the money of the board. And I would like to know if we have a complete list of how much these board motions, like the summer learning program, the green bin program, and equity coaches, are currently costing the district.
You want an answer now, or Trustee Milburn?
I would like, if there isn't an answer now, I would like it brought back to the next budget meeting.
Yeah, it's a very complex question because every fiscal year is different. For example, in fiscal year 23-24, we budgeted $611,000 for summer learning program, and we spent way more than that. We spent somewhere in the vicinity of $900,000 supporting that program. This year, we budgeted $611,000, and we're holding ourselves to $611,000. So that's why we saw a reduction in the number of students that could participate in that program. Things like the green bin program. So there's budgeted savings and there's actual savings. So for example, for 23-24, we budgeted $600,000 and we spent $900,000. Well, if you've reduced the program to stay within budget, you save $300,000, but you don't actually get any budget savings, but you have actualized savings, right? So it's a very complex question. Same as the composting program. I think we set aside, and I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's $250,000. We ran the trial pilot project. Then we ran into some problems with vendor service in the city and what it would collect and who we could get to collect the green bins. I don't believe we spent a significant amount. So that was actual realized savings and budget savings. We were able to take what we didn't spend and apply it to some different facilities pressures. Same as the equity coaches. We did some changes to the way we utilize coaches. Those coaches are still equity coaches. They have an equity lens, but we moved them over to the programming portion of where all the coaches reside, or at least that's the proposal for next year. And so those coaches will go out and do academic supports, but they will still have an equity lens, and they will help bring that equity lens to the entire coaching team. So they'll have dual roles in how they support students in both equity and academic achievement. It's part of our commitment to try to improve in some of those areas. Maybe the director would like to say something about that.
Director?
Just through you, Madam Chair, just a very quick comment to add to the Associate Director's comments, which are absolutely right, is this opportunity and some of the reductions we made centrally has a centralized coaching team that'll work together rather than separate and siloed departments or divisions. It's important, Vice Chair Milburn, to note that some of the positions of central coaches are actually ministry funded. So there are times when we have a team of 5 where 2 of the positions are ministry funded, but we've in a discretionary manner added another 3 to make sure that we can serve the entire district. So it is a complicated process because sometimes 2 coaches alone won't actually do a lot of coaching. It would be more consulting, quite frankly. And so to build an actual coach cadre, we've combined the ministry funded with some of the discretionary to serve the district so that we don't have jaggedness. We don't have some schools being served and other schools having none at all. So we are doing our best to optimize that cadre of central support to serve the entire district so that the whole district moves along and not just a few schools, understanding that that support is differentiated. Some, again, a good example in mathematics are schools that have been designated by the ministry to receive support. So we do have a continuum of support, but we are combining ministry-funded positions with some discretionary. So I just wanted to put that on the table, that often when we look at that totality of the coaching support, some of it's covered. If we don't utilize those, that's money that going back to the ministry.
Thank you, Director. Okay, Trustee Milburn, I put you back on the speakers list for a second time. Trustee Lee, go ahead.
Hi, just a quick question. With the deficit that was over last year and previous year, we owe the ministry money. So is it within the planned recommended budget from these cuts that one of the included expenses, quote unquote, would be paying back that debt essentially?
Through you, Chair, that's why I kind of broke it up into two problems here. We have the reserve issue where we do have to pay back our accumulated reserves to be back in a balance, and then eventually we should be running a 2% reserve to be in a healthy state to deal with things like the pandemic or significant back pay raises and those kind of activities. And then, of course, our regular operations and what I call our structural deficit problem. They're two separate problems. The budget is going to address the structural deficit problems to kind of get us back in our operating lane so that we're not running or increasing our reserve problem. I see our reserve problem being resolved through the disposal of capital assets like McGregor-Eason and other properties that we've declared surplus that we've been working through with the ministry to dispose of. And I think that's how we should try to tackle that part of the problem. I think it would be unfair to our current students to try to rebuild that reserve on the back of the current program. So I think what we need to do is we just need to realign our regular operating program and deal with our reserves separately. If not, I think we would be making even tougher choices.
Okay, I guess that makes sense to me. As long it just relies on a fairly long timeline to both repay the ministry and rebuild our reserves. So if we're relying solely on capital asset disposition, then that's to me a huge risk in that capital, as we kind of are seeing right now, capital assets, their value changes over time, and if we're using our current book value as the metric for how to repay the ministry and rebuild our reserves, that's where I have some concern of that. This is relying solely on that aspect of the plan. So
yeah, through you, Chair, I hear what you're saying. I wouldn't say there's no concern. There's a risk level there, but I do think that we have enough surplus properties to really cover the liability. Like they're in very attractive neighborhoods that could either be repurposed for commercial use or residential use. So I do think, and we have multiple properties that we've previously declared surplus that have kind of been sitting in limbo. And I think amongst those properties, we should be in pretty good space. But obviously, if we saw that was not going to address our reserve issue, then I think you're right. The next phase would be, okay, what would be the next step to look at that?
okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. Second time speakers list now. Back to Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So I would like to know the sort of similar questions really that have already been asked, but I would like to know, I also asked this last night, but how much money is currently being used each year in legal cases and code of conduct issues? Because I think that there's a lot of, maybe it's not going to be millions of dollars, but I think you'd probably find that there are enough money that it could probably help support a whole bunch of special education or equity coaches or others, if instead of dealing with dysfunction, we use that money in better ways. So what amount of money can we count on getting actual figures in terms of how much money is spent each year for legal cases and code of conduct and vexatious code of conduct complaints.
Director?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, appreciate the comment this evening and the request last night. Trustee Kaplan-Murph, we'll put together a staff that amount and add it in the upcoming budgetary discussions.
Okay, thank you very much. I also wanted to, again, it's not going to solve, obviously, the structural issues that we're discussing, but I know that my colleague, Rob Campbell, when he was a trustee, put forward a very detailed analysis that showed that if we just simply reduced the temperature in each of our buildings by a couple of degrees, we could save substantial amount of money. Have you looked at those kinds of cost-saving measures when you're talking about the year-to-year inability to meet our financial obligations?
Through you, Chair. So when our buildings are occupied, our facilities are pretty old. We get a lot of complaints about temperature control, temperature in our buildings now, lack of air conditioning. So widespread changes in temperature over the 10-month period is almost impossible to regulate to try to save money. We already have programs in place for energy conservation in the summer months. And for our non-utilized space like portables, vacant portables and things like that to try to generate savings. And so we've already tried to capitalize on those kind of efficiencies in the past.
Just an additional quick comment, Trustee Kaplan-Murph. I appreciate the sort of looking for little inches of where we can make savings. Just a cautionary note that at times when we've tried that in the past, and I know it sounds superficial, but at times a 1 degree differential actually spiked the number of instances where employees brought their own heater or air conditioner or fan, which actually drove costs way up because they were doing isolated one-off events to say it's a little too warm in my room. Let me just bring a fan to plug that in. So we have to be really careful with the kind of systematic analysis of that nature that the Associate Director is talking about, or you can actually really increase costs multiple fold because people react on individual behavior in a different manner if we're not regulating that properly. So it's not just a simple reduction in a degree. It can actually do the reverse effect.
Fair, thank you. So one more question, which Trustee Milburn already touched on a little bit, but when we're talking about necessities, I know it's been brought to my attention by constituents, the question of whether or not we've already eliminated the coaches that we had for 2S LGBTQ students. Also, there's the Jewish equity coach. There's also the Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian equity coach. And those are all not items that are centrally funded by the Ministry of Education. So are we considering those to no longer be necessities?
Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, staff has taken the spirit of the initiatives and endeavors of the board of the past and tried to maintain the spirit of that intact. So going forward, we do in fact and have hired an individual around 2S LGBTQIA plus supports. Our Palestinian and Muslim and Arab supports, our Jewish supports remain intact. What the Associate Director was describing was a dual role for those individuals. One part of it is to work on equity-specific initiatives. A good example there is the anti-hate toolkit that they've been developing and refining over time. The other part of their work will be to actually coach the coach team, which expands that group from 5 to 50 in terms of infusing equity-related supports in the regular instruction that happens across all other subject areas and disciplines. So the idea of the refined coach model, and we think it's going to be very effective. And to be honest with you, it's a return to the way some of the coaching happened in the past, is that those individuals will support a broader coach team so that we can actually amplify the kind of equity-related work that we need to do as it's tied to achievement and well-being. So that's the spirit. Staff will continue to support and endorse the existence of coaches that work on equity-related matters tied to achievement and well-being.
Thank you, but can you just clarify for me then, the individuals who were hired in those positions, are they still employed by us doing those roles, or are you saying that this refined coach model has somehow amalgamated those roles into one person?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes and no. So for the most part, those individuals as individuals remain intact because they started a coaching time with us and will continue through that. But a coaching position tends to last somewhere around 3 to 4 years. And we look to have a rotation for a number of reasons. When you bring in fresh people from the system into coaching roles, you also benefit from individuals returning from their central experience into school. So it's not a lifetime position. But for the most part, when I think of the individuals in those roles, and I don't know them all individually, but the majority of them simply continue in their role. But some of them have kind of to the end of the term of their time here with us in central coaching roles. Some have moved on to appointments to vice principalship, that kind of thing. So we do have a natural ebb and flow. And the idea here, if you have a 3-year cycle, is you replace a third of them every year. If you have a 4-year cycle, you replace a quarter every year so that you're not wholesale changing the structure in one given year. You've got them on a rotation depending on the length of time. And there are instances, as a final comment, where you might renew an individual for a term and another individual might say, I've had a great experience. I'm ready to return to a school or a position opens up in an area that they like. So it's a bit of a combination of both.
Okay, but we haven't cut the funding then to those.
No, I think there's been a reduction on balance from 6 to 5, if I'm not mistaken, one position just in the overall piece that the associate director mentioned that we're all trying to reduce slightly, but not a significant reduction. And we're actually looking, as I mentioned, to amplify the work of equity across a broader coaching group.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Trustee Scott, you're up next.
Thank you. I'd like to start by going back to the question of the rebuilding reserves through disposition of assets, because certainly we do have a number of capital assets which are not in use and which are things that are already closed. But given the number of restrictions around the disposition of capital assets in terms of who you have to offer it to and what they have to pay, and I think the best you can get typically if it's taken up by another school board or a municipality or something, is what is, quote, fair market value. What are we talking about fair market value these days when it comes to valuing a school facility?
Through you, Chair, I think there's a lot of factors in that. Age of the building, location of the building, what's around it, what it could be repurposed for. But I will say that I tasked my team to do a evaluation of multiple sites that are currently vacant that we are trying to dispose of. And you're correct in the sense that we did circulate 2 properties a couple of years ago. 2 other school boards put their hand up to acquire those sites. They were not funded to acquire those sites by the province. They sat in limbo. Now we're restarting the process again. And at least one, if not both, school boards are no longer interested in those properties. So there is a bit of a time delay and some complexities around the disposal of those capital assets. But we are in the phase of seeking professional real estate evaluations of the value of those properties, so that if we do get another school board coming forward with wanting one of those properties, that we have a negotiating start point.
Second question is, are where those properties consist of school facilities, are the pupil places in those included in the total 17,000 surplus pupil places?
Through you, Chair, no site that's currently not a designated school is included in those 17,000. So if you're looking at McGregor Easton or the Burrito Hub or any of those other sites, none of those pupil places, just currently operating schools. Thank
you for that. Looking at the targeted reductions, we've heard a little bit about that. In terms of the academic 4.85 million, is that basically all staff positions?
There's some operational expenses in there as well related to program services.
And would those be part of the decisions that we made at the end of March in terms of academic staffing?
The
for coming
positions
year?
would be, yes. So when we presented academic staffing, for example, just one example of that would be that we were staffing the e-learning courses for grade 11 and 12 at 23-to-1 ratio when the ministry funds at a 35-to-1 ratio. So we made the appropriate adjustment in our academic staffing report. So when you approved academic staffing, you in essence approved a reduction in 11 positions or something like that to the academic side.
Thank you for clarifying that. In terms of the special education reduction, the 4.8 mil, again, how much of that was already previously decided when we made our academic staffing decisions back in March?
Through you, Chair, I don't have an exact figure on that. There were some positions that were part of that academic staffing report that did have some of those reductions, for sure, but I don't have the number here in front of me.
When we have our next budget meeting, it would be helpful to have an understanding of what things we actually have already done so that we have a clear head of what are we doing in addition to that, if that's okay.
Absolutely. It is a little bit of a moving target. So part of the problem with academic staffing and presenting it in March before we have our true enrollment numbers, our enrollment keeps changing. It's changed 3 times since the academic staff and will change again, yet again. And so there's a discretionary, non-discretionary component to it. So there's a variety of factors in there that, and this is the first time that we've ever done an academic and a non-academic staffing together. So the numbers, even when we were trying to reconcile them, were a bit tricky to us. But absolutely, I hear what you're saying, and I will make sure that I do my best to identify the portions that have already been approved and the ones that are part of the rest of the budget approval.
Thank you. And the last question I wanted to be clear about was in terms of the overall expectations within the concept of programs and so on, because some of the things that we refer to as programs are really more services than they are programs. And some of them are ministry funded and some of them are not. And it gets very confusing when we keep using program to mean a lot of different things. So when we're talking about different programs that we might be reducing or eliminating, is it possible to be very clear about whether or not those are programs or services or combinations thereof, and whether they are actually funded or not funded, and whether they are going to be combined or absorbed or amalgamated with other things that are funded, or whether they really are standalone unique things that we are just literally taking away?
Through you, Chair, you make a very valid point. And even when Trustee Kaplan-Murphy mentioned program in her comment, I could see where that confusion would lie. I tend to use the word program probably way too frequently because in my military days, program, it was all programs. But here in the school board, program has a very different connotation. So duly noted, and we will definitely take greater care in identifying activities, services, programs, et cetera, moving forward in our reports.
Thank you.
Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can't help myself. Last year, Chair Scott, we went through an exercise centrally around what's a division and what's a department, what's a service and what's an office. I thought that exercise would last 4 hours. It lasted 40 days with a lot of interaction with employee services to align a whole series of things, including how people are titled in positions and how they're funded. The next frontier we'll tackle is what's a program and what's a service, because I think you're right, we mix those. All of us do, including staff, so I agree wholeheartedly with the Associate Director. We do need to straighten that out. In my mind, childcare is an example of a service, but we do have early years programming. So it's complicated sometimes because these intersect. We do need to do what you're talking about. We'll look to do that as staff. I'll also bring forward what we did in terms of departments and divisions for the Board of Trustees, just so that you're aware. Equities is a division versus business and learning technologies as a department. So I'll provide that for trustees, but we will do what you're speaking to. I think it's needed.
Thank you. It really helps when we actually can find common vocabulary, so we're actually can be reasonably assured we're talking about the same thing.
Trustee Scott, did you want to go back on the speakers list? Okay. Moving on, Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. I want to talk for a minute about the disposition of property, just building on what Trustee Scott has said. I am a little bit concerned about our plan to use disposition of property to rebuild our surpluses, because once we sell many of our properties, if they do get turned into residential or commercial spaces, we will be in quite a pickle when we have to buy spaces in areas that are increasing in development. So there's been a commitment by the city to increase densification across the city. And I am concerned that if we start selling school sites, we will be in a position in the future to need a school site in an area or to want a school site in an area with a high demand, with no ability to purchase it at a reasonable price, particularly in areas within the urban core. I'm thinking about sites like you mentioned the Rideau Hub. If we sell the Rideau Hub, we're not getting a high school sized property in that area unless we're willing to start expropriating significant numbers of properties. And that's not something the board would want to go down financially. And so I am a little bit concerned about the disposition of property being our plan to solve our deficit.
Through you, Chair, I hear your concerns. I echo your concerns. We have no intention of putting the Rideau Hub there. I agree with you 100%. I believe that's an area that there's some long-term requirements for, and as population density shifts throughout. The sites that I'm talking about are sites that were previously identified for surplus, have already been circulated to the province. I'm not talking about any new sites. There are some rules and regulations that have changed around surplus properties. And so we do have to follow the ministry guidelines. So we can't prove that we feel like there's a need within a 10-year period for the property, then we do have certain obligations and whatnot. But I take your points wholeheartedly, and I can assure you that we will try to do everything within our power to support our future needs and not put ourselves in a situation where we would have to pay exorbitant fees. But I will say that if, for example, we did get ourselves in a situation like that, that's why we have the EDCs. And if there were growth in an area that previously didn't have that growth and we had to acquire new property, we would certainly have, it wouldn't be board resources. We would have resources to purchase that. And we track what our future needs will be, and we set our EDC rates in 5-year increments. So we would see that coming, but needless to say, why would we want to create, it might be not even being available. And so we wouldn't want to find ourselves in a situation where we couldn't find a piece of property that we knew we were going to need. So we'd take all that under advisement.
Yeah, particularly I'm thinking about the block on Saint Laurent. I don't think you're going to be able to get a site like that again. I'm thinking about 440 Albert. If we sell that site, we're not getting anything like that downtown again. And so those are my concerns around that. I do hear what you said, and I'm glad you've taken into under advisement. I have a question about, is there any money or grants that are available that we're not currently utilizing? So there was a comment a moment ago about how there are grants for things, and if we don't take the money, we've got to send it back. Are there pools of money that we're not tapping into? Are there things that we're not doing that we could do to bring in more revenues?
Through you, Chair, that's a tough question to answer. Certainly, there's certain grants and whatnot that come out in the REP program that we're very astute and aware of, and that we generate activities against. I know that sometimes we struggle to find activities for some of those grants. Like I think this summer, health promotion grant was one area where there were a couple of years where we weren't fully utilizing that grant. Last year, we overspent it a little bit. So I know staff work hard to utilize the resources provided by the ministry to the best of our ability. Are there other grants out there that we may or may not be aware of, or opportunities that we may or may not be aware of? I can't put my hand on my heart and promise you there's none, but a lot of the folks have been around here for a very long time, and are pretty aware of those things. And we talk amongst ourselves as SBOs, and our finance managers talk with other school boards and things. So as we become aware, especially in these difficult financial times, we talk about different things that we can do, whether it's how we represent our financial shortfall. So that's People Place lost revenue. That was a discussion that I had with another school board, and how they were representing that particular pressure. And so we're starting to better align ourselves in different ways like that, and taking advantage of how we present our data and how we utilize resources to support ourselves. So, yeah.
Okay. I have a question about if there is a list somewhere of all of the places that we have discretionary spending spent that we are not explicitly funded for. So you've talked about some of the big hitters. You've talked about the $80 million in specific things we're underfunded for. Do we have a list of other places, things like where the director has said that we're funded for 2, we're choosing to put in 3 more? Do we have a list of all of those places that are discretionary funding?
Through you, Chair, I think I've been talking about our lack of information systems in the financial realm since I got here. As you are aware, we're in the middle of a new ERP system implementation. We literally have no position control function within the organization right now. We're trying to build that. Very hard to align resources to programs, discretionary to non-discretionary, and sometimes the way it's funded through the ministry as an other pot. Is it in that pot? Is it not in that pot? Does it make it discretionary? Does it not make it discretionary? We were mistakenly putting the 23-to-1 versus the 35-to-1 e-learning ratio in the non-discretionary when the reality was that it was. So we are doing our best to align. There is no magic list. There's certain areas that stick out like a sore thumb because they're quite large, but it's the smaller chunks that do add up once you get your hands on them that we need to look at. But that has been part of the exercise that I've been endeavoring to do for the past 2.5 years is figure some of that stuff out. But I honestly don't think that we're going to be in a really strong position to identify all those chunks for another year or 2 until we get our new system in place, till we properly align our resources, because we don't even know what folks are doing what tasks sometimes in our financial systems. So it makes it very hard to track. So that's not a short-term project, that's a long-term project.
So you've preempted my next question. I knew it wasn't going to be for this budget cycle. It was, what is the timeline you think that is reasonable to align those revenues and expenses? And you said a year or 2?
Closer to 2, because it's going to take a year to finish the implementation of the ERP and then to get up and running and use it and make sure that we're using it correctly. And then also unwinding the technical papers is a challenge in itself as well. That sometimes the information and the details are just not there to always know for sure. But I mean, I will give the board updates at various points of progress we're making in some of these areas.
Okay. What I think is my last question. We've said a number of times that we need $20 million in differential funding. The numbers that you have put forward, sum to 19, is that the about 20, or are we going to, even if we made all of these savings, still find ourselves in a deficit position?
Through you, Chair. So those numbers, I've said a lot of times 17 to 20. I've mentioned that range. The thing is that if we were going on last year's program, it would be closer to 17 or $18 million, right? But as the technical papers drop and the new pay raise gets implemented, those numbers are constantly shifting target. So the new 2.5%, like I just showed with the facilities, there's an underfunding there. And then all of a sudden there's an inflationary factor in there that also kicks in. So until we push all, and then it's enrollment driven. And there's so many factors into this that for us to say there's no exact number until all the dust settles, till we get all the data into EFIS, till those students actually show up. We put 1,000 extra students in by mistake and they don't show up. Then all of a sudden we have a mid-year financial adjustment that we need to make. We recently were surprised by a WSIB increase, $4 million, right? I mean, these are on the margins when you're talking a $1.2 billion budget, but they're really significant when you're talking, $4 million is how much money towards teachers, EAs, other parts of the program, these corporate costs that we have no control over. So, it's an ever shifting target, and it's the one thing that we are doing is we're not being risky anymore. I think we've taken some risk in the program in the past to try to pass balanced budgets. We're trying to intentionally be a lot less risky, and back to aligning expenses and revenues, and back to being as realistic as possible on our enrollment forecasts. And we'd rather deal with the problems now than be faced with a surprise later on.
Sorry, I'll try and clarify my question a little bit. Is the $19 million in proposed savings going to get us to a balanced budget, a surplus budget, or a deficit budget?
My intention is that will get us to a balanced budget, and that is based on 24-25 results and what we used I can't remember the exact dollar figure, but it's 9 point something million dollars in deferred revenue to offset some spec ed expenses plus some other increases that we were aware of. So when you transfer those over to the next year, we were hoping that 19 million, but again, until the dust settles, it's impossible to say for sure. You can't forecast what that number will be, because I'll give you a crazy example. They just implemented a new grid for VPs in the EFIS system, and that never existed last year. And it resulted in a $600,000 reduction in funding for us for VPs that we wouldn't have received last year. You can't forecast that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of things the tricks that unfortunately get played on us when we input our data into the system. So we are really reliant on, we can do the expenses piece all we want, but we can't do the revenue piece until we get our enrollment numbers and we get it into the system that generates the revenue portion of it.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Lyer. We'll go to Trustee Milburn, and then we'll go to our community members, Eni and Mr. Wong. So Trustee Milburn.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I am going to be following up with some additional questions to staff after the meeting. But my main question that I want to end with tonight is our next meeting for the budget is June 10th. Can you please tell me what we can expect at that meeting and what the report is going to look like and the budget is going to look like, and more structure of the report and the budget? You don't have to tell me the numbers.
Well, through you, Chair, I don't have the numbers. I couldn't tell you the numbers if I wanted to, but I really do want to. I'd love to have the numbers right now. So I had that discussion with my staff today, and I can preemptively disappoint you on the timeliness of when that report will come in. We had that discussion at agenda planning today. I won't know whether or not my staff can prepare a recommended budget for that date in its fullest format, because, like I said, these are very complex work. This is very complex work. My staff have worked literally through the entire weekend, and will work evenings and weekends between now and that point. And I am a slave to their ability to get that information in EFIS, generate those reports, and for us to then see what we need to do to make the appropriate tweaks and whether or not we're in the right risk areas before I can generate all the slides and do the presentation to you here. But I will do everything in my power and everything within my staff's power to present you a recommended budget that has details on the areas that we're recommending reductions in. At the end of the day, you don't need all the reports that you've gotten in some of the previous budget. What you really want to know, I think, as a group of trustees, is what reductions are you guys recommending to balance the budget? What's in the budget? What's not in the budget? Like, that's the crux. So that's really where I'm focusing all my energy and attention on.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Milburn. Moving on to our community members. Eni, go ahead, please.
Randy, I know how you feel, buddy. I work in nonprofit, and finance is it's a thorn in my heel, or whatever that saying is. My question I have for you is, how much revenue are we getting from the Rideau Hub? Because we have the two other schools, I guess you said there are two other properties that potentially could be sold, but I guess my question is, what's the revenue we're getting from the hub?
Through you, Chair, I don't have the exact figure in front of me, but I can tell you this, that it is revenue positive. So
Yeah.
what we're spending to maintain that site versus what we're bringing in revenue it's greater than what it's costing, and it generates a surplus. And we've been setting the surplus associated with that aside to continue to maintain that property. So we're not allowed to use our FRPSCI funding to pave the parkway or do facility repairs and things like that to that property. So we set aside any additional revenues associated with the site specifically to address those issues. And we have had to do that multiple times. Security, some incidents with security, so we had to put some extra cameras in, things like that. And so it's not a drag on the board in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I know that because our agency has put in probably about 1.2 million into the area where we have, right? So there's no cost to you guys. It's we get the funding and we put it in. So that I guess that's for those two other parcels of land or schools or whatever they are. I think that may be a way to look at community engagement, community involvement of wherever those schools are. That would be my suggestion. My next question is, what was the budget last year for the spec ed department? Like, was it around 130 million or give or take a bit?
Through you, Chair, my general finance manager is going to take a look. I can't remember the exact figure. But I know it's in that ballpark. When you say fiscal year 23, 24, or 24, 25?
Just last year. I mean, this year, because I mean, if you're cutting $4.4 million from a budget of 130 million, it's only a cut of about 2.5%, right? And so then the question would be is, what's the budget this year and what was the budget last year? And is there really a cut? Those are my questions, right? Like, that's all I'm asking. I mean, in the end, there's got to be cuts all the way around because let's be honest, you don't want the trustees to lose their jobs if the province comes in and takes over the budget. I mean, in the end, get to zero.
From a percentage perspective, you're absolutely right. It's a small reduction. I'm just going to take a look at that. $160 million, basically. So through you, Chair, it was 160 million approximately.
Okay, so it's even less of a percentage. Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. You're doing a great job, by the way. It's a difficult position. My father was in the Army for 40 years, and he was the head of finance, so I know what you're dealing with.
Thank you. And is that it for your questions then?
Well, go on the second round there, and if I have anything else, I'll let you know.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Wong.
Through you, the chair. What does it mean by, in more details, the semi-discretionary pressures for special education supports in the context of the 14 million? Is it all special? Semi-discretionary for the 14 million?
Through you, Chair. I guess what I mean by semi-discretionary was that we have control over the amount of money that we invest in things like the summer learning program, SPCs, and EAs and other components of the program. But the reality is that I would never advocate that we spend just what we get on from the Ministry on special education. I know the need is way greater than the demand. We also have legal obligations to those students through the Tribunal, the Human Rights Act. There's a variety of different factors there. So we are making choices, I think, that that we could be making differently that would reduce some of those expenditures. But then in other cases, children have a right to access to education, and we should be investing in EAs. And sometimes that means we're going to invest more. And that's not really a discretionary expense. Like, we have to invest in those resources to ensure that those children have the supports they need to attend school. So it's a bit of a balancing act. So I think that sometimes it's an area where we could make a hard decision on, and we may not like the decision, but we could make a hard decision, summer learning program being one. But then at another time, overspending on EAs is an area where we shouldn't really make that hard decision. We need to add some EAs. We need to make sure that those children have an opportunity to go to school and support it with the special supports that they need. So that's what I mean when I say it's semi-discretionary. I think there's components on both sides of it. And the ministry might come down and say a lot of it's discretionary, and I would argue that's not true. But I also would argue that not all of it's non-discretionary either.
And going to that point, how well does the ministry understand that we kind of like CHEO, we are a center point for the other school boards in the region and the whole general Eastern Ontario region for collecting students in special needs coming into Ottawa for special needs as a center for support?
Through you, Chair, I think that's a bit of advocacy work that we need to do. I'm sure they're aware. I mean, I'm sure we're in no different boat than Toronto with a special needs hospital that services those groups and draws families with those needs because they can get better supports in bigger cities. I don't think some of the smaller boards across the province have the same complexities to the same levels that we might have. I think a public board versus the Catholic board have different challenges as far as the students that they support in some of these areas too. But there's certainly no provisions in the funding formula to address that challenge that we face, and there's no forgiveness for our deficit because of it. So regardless of whether they understand it, they're certainly not acknowledging it with their wallet.
And then in terms of for the discretionary, semi-discretionary supports, how does that relate to the targeted reductions in terms of the 4.8 million in special education cuts? Is it that discussion tied to that, or is this special conversation altogether different?
Through you, Chair, the superintendent of special education has been actively engaged in reviewing the program and making recommendations on areas that we could make potential adjustments to. So these would be discretionary areas and administrative support to the program that we could make some of these kinds of reductions to, or programs that were not mandated to run. So I think the reductions that we're going to recommend will be all discretionary choices that are tough, but possible for us to make as an organization.
Have they been already identified at this point, or?
Through you, Chair, we're working through some of that now. We're not at the final number on that, but most of those areas we've been working for months and months as a team on this.
Any particular areas as a brush to have an idea?
Not at this time.
Thank you.
Is that it, Mr. Wong?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Wong. Going to third time speaker, Trustee Lyra.
Thanks. So in years past, there's been a strong desire for members of the board to have input on the budget. And I am not one to shy away from making tough choices, but I do believe that choices need to be made by the board. And so I am concerned, based on the history of how budget processes have trended over the last number of years, that we are going to get a recommendation with no ability to make choices. We're going to get a recommendation from staff that says, here is where staff thinks the cuts need to land, please pass it. And I'm wondering if I can get assurances from the director or from the CFO that what is going to come before the budget committee does involve choices. So there was a lengthy discussion yesterday about the summer learning program, and if the recommendation comes that we do not need the summer learning program, or the summer learning program is great, but the recommendation is to cut it, how would trustees say, we appreciate that recommendation, but we would like to find the cuts in an area other than special education, or we would like to find the cuts in an area other than X or Y?
Through you, Chair, I think it's a tough question to answer, and I hear what you're saying, right? But when you're under $80 million worth of pressure on your entire program, we don't have $30 million worth of discretionary cuts we could make, and you can pick the 20 you want. Like, the complexity of collective agreements, protected complement, laying off of staff, attrition, having the staff put our academic staffing out in advance, the ratios, like there's no ability when you're under the current financial pressures that you're under to have a buffet of options. We are struggling to find things that we would recommend to the board to reduce that has the least amount of impact on classrooms, marginalized communities, or groups, and still operate this organization in a credible, functional way. This is not easy work. This is work where SOIs are arguing with each other at the table. Like, this is not something that you can just redraw on a dime. This is long-term planning. Like, if you want to make a change to a certain program or activity or whatever, there's community involvement. Sometimes there's students who are already in the program that you have to phase out. There's so many factors. So to think that we could present you with $30 million worth of options and for you to pick 20 of them, that's just not a realistic a way that we could do this. So we are going to present you some recommendations. You might not like some specific recommendations. You might challenge us on trying to find additional savings. I think we've done that kind of process in the past. I had recommended SLP or 10 EAs, and you guys selected both. So you didn't pick either. So there's another part of the problem with offering lots of options. There's people behind these decisions, right? Like, it matters. We have to be cognizant of that component of it too. So I think the complexity behind what you're asking for is not realistic in the situation we're in. If we were in a situation where we were just shaving the ice cube like we have in the past, that might be a different story. We could say, hey, we could take some out of composting, or we could take some out of something else. We're no longer in that situation, right? We're in a situation where we're trying to run balanced budgets, and we're structurally running deficit budgets. So now it's like, okay, these are the fundamental changes that we're going to recommend. If you choose not to action some of those recommendations, it might mean a deficit budget. It might mean the province coming down. I don't know. It might mean that we could find some alternatives. It really depends on how deep you go. But if you told me right now today that we will take 0 reductions in spec ed, that $4.8 million you find somewhere else, I will tell you that I cannot bring to you a balanced budget under those constraints. It's impossible for me to do, because even if I wanted to lay off an additional 50 staff, I wouldn't even be able to do it, because 1, protected complement would become involved. 2, we've already made collective agreements to some of those teachers. Like, there's way too many complexities to find those kind of savings for next year. So that's kind of the situation we're in right now.
So I guess the question is, what is the purpose of elected trustees doing decisions and oversight if there is no ability for the trustees to meaningfully impact the budget based on the wills of our community? If my community, and I'm going to pick my community because poverty is the issue that impacts my community the deepest. And so my concern is, if the recommendations come out and it says we're cutting all of the poverty work to save special education, we're cutting 80% of the poverty work to save special education, I feel it is my obligation and my duty to stand up and say that we cannot cut so deeply into poverty. And I do not understand by what mechanism the staff are asking trustees to provide input into the budget beyond just approving what you perceive to be the tough choices. We talk a lot about tough choices, and I would like to make tough choices. I would like us to say, I'd like us to have the same kinds of conversations that the superintendents are arguing about. Because you just said that superintendents argue about what is needed and where we can go. a group of incredibly clever people. And I think that if you put the conversations that you are having with each other in front of us, we would be equally capable of engaging in them.
Through you, Chair, I hear what you're saying, but I think this is where you confuse your role as governance over the organization versus the operations of the organization. And the governance body should be setting parameters around the programs that we should be investing in, but not telling us exactly how to execute those programs or exactly detailing out motions or things to say, you shall spend $600,000 and do 17 days of X, Y, Z. You're absolutely right. You can't get that deep into the weeds, and you can't have those. This is full-time work. This is full-time work, months of full-time work. You can't do it in a couple board meetings over a month or 2 months. Like this is all part of our strategic plan. Your role from a governance perspective is to ensure that we prioritize the things in the strategic plan that you want us to work towards. But you can't then pay lip service and say, we want academic achievement, but then we want equity, but then we want social responsibility. You have to put priorities behind some of those things and say, we want to move the needle in this area. Why aren't you moving the needle in that area down the road in another meeting? Like we need to focus our attention and energy on the things that are important to trustees. And that's the discussion that you guys should be having around the table and saying, you know what, we've ignored academic achievement long enough. It's time to make that the #1 priority of the board. And we'd like to see you guys start focusing your attention. And it's not always about new money. Sometimes it's about using current resources differently, kind of like we're doing with the coaches. We're taking those equity coaches, we're putting them in with the academic coaches, and we're broadening our perspective, and we want to move that needle on academic achievement, and we want to move that needle on equity at the same time. But that's the kind of thing that where I see in the past we've had conflict between what we present to you and what your guys' role is versus what the staff role is in some of these activities.
Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate the Associate Director's comments and agree wholeheartedly. Trustee Lyra, I understand the frustration on your part that you would like a whole array of options to say, look, of all the discretionary funding, this is what we'd like to keep, this is what we wouldn't. In 10 years as a Director of Education, this is the tightest budgetary process I've ever been through, and that looks to be getting tighter and tighter. Most of the funding we get, as opposed to many moons ago, is more and more sweatered over time. There's less and less flexibility, right down not only from a governance perspective, but an operational one. What I'm going to ask of you, I'm not sure is entirely fair, but because this is a repeated comment you've brought forward, I'm going to ask you going into next school year, as we bring reports forward to you that you feel are useless, I want you to point them out to us as an organization, as staff, to say, you know what, that entire report, that entire department, that division is useless in its entirety, because I can tell you everything we're doing, and the discussions and the arguments amongst the senior table are about how we operationally coordinate things. They're not about the actual dollar amount. We're not playing with a series of buckets that we have millions and millions that we double up here and reduce entirely there. So truly, if there is something that comes forward that we bring to you over the next year that is entirely to be done away with, signal it to us and we'll reflect on that for the next budgetary process. But I can tell you, in 10 years as director, I've never heard it from a trustee. I've never heard from a trustee that entire report you brought forward on that item, just do away with it entirely. And that's the point I'm trying to make, that all of our work is entirely essential, and we are trying to coordinate and manage not only our strategic priorities, but how we do that within a budget. So please, if there is something that you think we ought to not do whatsoever, just signal it to us, because when we get to budget period, it's fictitious to think that we've got all this money that we're playing with. It's actually very restricted for the points that our associate director has raised, including collectively bargained agreements, our commitments to various elements of the Education Act. We're not freewheeling with a budget here of $1.2 billion. It's quite the opposite. There's a very small percentage which we have to play with. And at times, we need to ensure we support what we're ministry funded with some of the discretionary to actually make it work in a large, complex organization such as ours.
I'm going to go back on the list because what I have to say will take longer than 20 seconds.
Now we'll go to third-time speaker, Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director, for your comments. I think one of the challenges we have is that we are struggling sometimes with our role as board members, which is basically setting the priorities and monitoring how we're making progress towards reaching those priorities. In the webinar that was held today for trustees across the province on budgeting and financial management, one of the things they pointed out was the need to be taking that long-term view, because kids are with us for 14 years. And we need to see them through from start to finish. But what we are not, frankly, doing as good a job as we need to do, and we need to do more of, and that is monitoring the progress through the course of the year. So my question to the Associate Director is whether we are including anything to ensure that the resources are there within the finance department to be able to produce more regular reports that give us some sense of how our actual expenditures are tracking against the budget that we have approved, so that we are able to monitor that and tie that as well to some of the reports that we are receiving from other departments around how our kids are doing in our schools, because that really is what we need to be looking more closely at, but we don't seem to have enough tools to bring the information together. And I think that if we're going to do a really good job, those are the kinds of things we need to be paying a lot of attention to, so that when it comes to budget time, we can just do it without having to fuss too much, as long as about anything except the alignment and the expected results.
Through you, Chair, I hear your comments, and I do would like to get into a cycle of providing regulatory budget updates to the board. It would be unconscionable for me to ask for more finance staff under the current environment that we're in right now. We're making reductions in special education. I don't want to make these cuts in special education. The bucket is the bucket. We have no choice. And for me to say I need an extra finance officer to do reporting to the board versus an EA in front of a student right now, it would be a tough sell, and I couldn't do it in all honesty. That being said, I think what's going to allow me to get to more responsible regular reporting would be the new ERP system and the tools, because literally the tool that we're using now is so archaic. We didn't build it right. It wasn't fed right with the right information. We're literally working off Excel spreadsheets that are 20 years old. It's horrendous and terrible, but you can't change it, right? Like, we're too big and too complex to change it. I can tell you that my previous general manager, her health suffered in the role. She was putting in way too many hours. She went to a different board with a smaller budget and less budget pressures and accumulated surplus. This is the reality of my finance team. I had another member go out on sick leave, stress leave. I've had another member go out on sick leave, stress leave. Like, my team's under a tremendous amount of pressure. To be honest with you, it wasn't for Kevin coming back here, I don't know what state we would be in the finance group right now. But I am committed and have been committed since I've been here to aligning revenues, expenses, and improving our reporting. And we have made big strides. We have made huge strides. We're getting more regular reporting to SOIs about individual school budgets, and that's small money, but important work. We've been holding budget holders within the central division accountable to the budget, because in the past, someone would overspend a budget, no one would say anything, right? Like, the work that we're doing now, I've canceled credit cards on a regular basis when people don't comply with the rules now. I get phone calls all the time. Like, we're doing a lot of good stuff that we need to do. but we're not there yet. But we're getting there closer and closer every day. And we've moved the yardstick a long way, but there's still more work to be done.
Thumbs up.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. We'll go back to community members. Inini, go ahead, please.
Randy, you're a good man. My question is, I'm a nonprofit and budget is budget. It's just the way it is. And I think the accountability piece on who's got a credit card. Like, I think understanding that, teachers are teachers. They went to school to be teachers. They didn't go to school to do spreadsheets and financial literacy, right? And I think understanding that maybe there's some streamlined process around teaching people how to do a budget and how to stay within budget, because I've been with my organization for 8 years now, and the board has never stayed within budget. I mean, let's be honest. And I mean, community tax dollars. I mean, so I think the accountability piece is that as a whole, as an agency, as a board, staff have to be committed to, fulfilling the plan and saying, okay, I don't get a credit card because we can't spend any money. Like, that's just the reality of it. And then reaching out to community partners and understanding that, you're in an education business and I'm in the community business. And if you need money for certain aspects, ask us. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's what people have to understand is you're in the teach, read, write, arithmetic. That's your jobs, like to get people ready for life. My other question is, because I'm always about trying to find money and I've been told I'm good at finding money. My question is, do we receive revenue dollars from international students like they do in post-secondary?
Through you, Chair, our international program does generate more revenue than expense, and we actually subsidized the board by $1 million $1 million each year for the last couple of years with the additional revenues that we generated from our OCNet program. So we absolutely are tapping into that as an opportunity, and I am, like you, always looking for money and investigating other types of partnerships and things that we can do to generate revenue. This group of trustees will see some initiatives in the course of the next year or two on some changes that we're proposing to help capitalize in some areas that maybe we haven't been capitalizing on in the past from a revenue perspective. So absolutely, absolutely.
So here's my other question. Because Ottawa is the central hub to the north, my question is, do you ever get any transfer education dollars from the government of Nunavut, for instance? Because they're, some of their students are living here in Ottawa, they're here for medical travel, but they're stuck in limbo. So then my question is, are you able to work with the government of Nunavut and say, hey, let's do some transfer dollars in the sense of supporting kids down here? It's just questions I have. Like, are there interprovincial revenue streams? I don't know.
Through you, Chair, we don't have any interprovincial revenue streams that I'm aware of. There's some pretty strict rules around enrollment of out-of-province students and things like that. But if they were here and they had an address, we could enroll them as a regular student and get the appropriate ADE for them and things like that. Interesting. I'm not aware of it as an opportunity. Mind speaking to you more about it? Happy to explore anything that might generate some additional revenues for the board. But at this point in time, I don't think we don't have an avenue for that. And another thing I've been kind of doing over the last year is reevaluating the partnerships that we do have in place, and we do with the federal government and other agencies, other school boards, and truly whether or not we're covering all of our costs when we do business with some of these other entities. In particular, I find that there's a little bit of a lack of ignorance of indirect costs associated with running these programs. It requires HR, admin, payroll, et cetera, to support them. So we're looking at renegotiating some of the deals to add 10% admin fee to help cover some of these
fee
costs.
for service. It's
Exactly.
fee for service.
This is the same kind of stuff that I used to do with the federal government when I was in the federal government. But it's a culture change around here. And when I talk in my presentation about better business practices, it's thinking about what the true cost is when we're delivering a service to the community, and making sure that we're not holding the bag for some additional expenses and things like that.
I think, what was my last question?
Director, did you want to say?
Just 2 points. I think you raised a couple of good examples. Just to comment on international students, we've had this conversation with our partner in OCNet. I don't feel we've optimized that fully. We have to be careful and make sure that, you know, the driver of international education is not the money. It's the experiential learning of the benefit in bringing students to the National Capital Region and having our students explore other parts of the world. And I truly mean for learning experiences. These aren't sightseeing adventures. They are truly to gain an appreciation, awareness, a culture. It's an element or a pillar of social responsibility. We haven't quite optimized that yet, and we're looking to do that to make sure it's sustainable. Could we bring in more international students at the turn of a hat? Absolutely, but we've got to do it in a responsible way. So we've got to balance those numbers. We're not quite at optimization, but we've been talking to Executive Director Joff Best and Superintendent Amy Hanna, who has that portfolio, to look at how we do that over time. So it's a very valid point. The other one I wanted to add, just as a point of caution around partnerships, I think Associate Director Giroir makes a really good point around the actual cost of doing business. And when we engage a partnership, we have to be very cautious that it is value add for the organization. That's our responsibility. There are a number of partners that look at us and see us as property, see us as gymnasiums, as fields, as libraries, as rooms. And we've got to make sure that the partnerships we engage in not only are responsible on a cost front, but they actually add value to the programs and services we offer as an organization. So we don't jump at every possible partnership. We really take some time to analyze and make sure that it does add value, that it's sustainable, and that aren't hidden costs that show up later that a partner would then say, well, we have an agreement. How can you now be changing the dynamic? So just a point of caution on that front, that we don't just jump at every partnership. And to be frank, I've had lots of offers for partnership that when I've read the fine print, haven't added value. They've actually been an exploitation of the assets that we have as an organization. And I'm not saying people come maliciously for that, but we have to be cautious and careful about the kind of partnerships we engage. And I think the Associate Director spoke to some of the ones that are on the horizon that we're exploring, but we won't do it unless we can bring something forward to this table that is rock solid in terms of its value addedness to the organization.
So I just have one more question. It's a revenue, but it's also Indigenous language. And I just want to know, are we really maximizing that potential? Because, you know, I'm learning my language as I go, and, you know, it's been 50 years, but understanding that I know that we get separate dollars for that, but I just want to know if we're maximizing it.
Director.
That's another great example, Innie, of the kind of thing we're just going to keep exploring and keep building over time to make sure it's responsibly done, sustainable, doesn't burn out other elements of the organization in doing so. So I think you're right. That's another great example that where I think it's true. We've not quite optimized it, yes, but we're working towards it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Innie. Fourth time speaker, Trustee Lyra.
Thanks. So I appreciate what the executive officer and the director have said. Whenever you have a governance board and an operational staff, there will be a gray area that exists between what is governance and what is operational. And I am a little bit concerned because it feels to me like staff are trying to claim the entirety of the gray area. And as trustees, we are responsible for governance. We are also responsible for finances, and we are ultimately responsible for ensuring public accountability in public education. And so I'm concerned that we appear to have very little ability to input this budget. And so for whatever it's worth, I would like to see as much focus as we can on maintaining existing supports for students in poverty. It is the #1 priority for my community. It is the group that is the least able to leverage other societal advantages when those challenges come up. And so it is what I consider to be the #1 priority for making sure that this is not something that takes a significant cut in the budget. Thank you.
Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, staff agrees wholeheartedly. I think that's a priority area. I think Trustee Lyra's comments are well placed on where we can differentiate providing support. I would echo the concern the trustees mentioned from a governance perspective on an operational one. The kind of flexibility we had, quite frankly, in the way funds and grants had been provided in the past, it's just not there anymore in what were delivered, so to speak, in terms of the technical papers. So I echo the concern raised from an operational point of view.
And so that's it, Trustee Lyra?
That's all I have to say.
All right. So going back to first-time speakers, Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. So this is my 15th budget with the OCDSB. And I said this last year, I'm going to say it again. It's like Groundhog Day, a lot of what happens, a lot of the conversation. And for 15 years, we've had trustees come and go, and we debate what the role of trustee is. And we don't agree, and I don't think we'll ever agree. From my perspective, and I was in the mandatory trustee training today with a couple of my colleagues, though we couldn't see each other, but we were there. Yeah, it looks like Trustee Nash was there too. And what I want from staff, who I know work very hard in this district, over the years, I've come to realize that in a school board, it's very complicated. When I was a kid going to school, you know, I saw my teachers and I saw my principal and I saw the school administrator and the custodians, but I never thought about the people who actually run the school board. As a kid, I didn't know what a superintendent was, nor did I care. I didn't know what a director of education it was, nor did I care. I didn't know who worked in payroll, nor did I care. But as a trustee, I do care now. And there are a lot of people who work in this district who are unsung heroes, who don't get recognized, who get disrespected at this table unfairly. So to you, Associate Director, I say thank you for your leadership. You have a very, very difficult job. It's like being a meter maid. Nobody likes you. But I like you because you're a leader. And, you know, you said some things that I was aware of. You know, people go on sick when they're burnout. People can't work 14 hours a day. People can't go 2 weeks without a day off. People who are talented get offered other positions with other districts and other organizations. There are organizations all over this city with people from the OCDSB. And I thank our manager, Mr. Gartner, who's here with us today, who's retired, but who cares enough about this organization to come back and help us. And I was joking about him and his suit, whether it had mothballs, but you do look quite smashing tonight. So thank you for being here, and thank you for helping our kids, because it's not only teachers and principals and vice principals and superintendents who care about our kids, it's everybody. Everybody has a role who works for the OCDSB at ensuring that our kids succeed. And I hope that every one of those people get the equal respect that they deserve. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn.
Just one comment to that. I want to say thank you to the trustees around this table. And I know I don't always see eye to eye on some of the issues that we discuss here at this table, but I know every one of the trustees is here for a very good reason. They care about kids. They care about the service that we provide our community. And you guys don't get paid very much money for the hours that you guys put in. And I know you guys put in a tremendous number of hours. And I know you're out there every day talking to teachers, talking to students, talking to families, dealing with issues. I get a lot of emails asking for help with this problem, that problem, and things like that. And I don't think you guys get enough appreciation for the things that you guys have to do too. And this is tough. This is tough. Nobody wants to be in this spot that you guys are in as far as having to try to pass these balanced budgets and make these tough decisions. So I will echo your guys' commitment. Some of you guys have been here for 15 plus years, and some of you guys are new to the role. I'm sure none of it's easy. I've watched the strain that EPR put on some of the trustees. I was impressed by the way you guys were able to manage that and the way that you handled it and the vote that you do. I know you care about every part of this organization in many different ways. So I will also echo my thank you to you guys and the efforts that you guys made.
Thank you, Associate Director. Perhaps we'll end this meeting on a really positive note. Everyone's happy and everyone appreciates everyone. So are there any more questions for the Associate Director? Seeing none, moving on to item 7, new business. Are there any items of new business? Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the past 2 nights, I've heard a particular comment that I would like to give my view on. So for the record, Madam Chair, not one trustee on this board has been investigated for launching a vexatious code of conduct complaint. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Any other new business or inquiries? I now declare this meeting adjourned.